Don't move. Don't touch that phone. You so much as twitch, and I'm putting you on the ground." The hand on her shoulder pushed hard. Not a suggestion, a command. The kind that leaves no room for anything but compliance. She stood in the marble atrium of the Florida Supreme Court. Friday afternoon, 4:47 p.m. A woman in a plain cardigan, reading glasses on a cord. Comfortable flats. No briefcase. No lanyard. No indication of who she was, or who she was about to become. "I said hands where I can see them." Deputy Marshal Brick Hadley's fingers dug into her collarbone. His other hand rested on the radio clipped to his belt, thumb hovering over the call button. Behind him, a crowd was forming. Clerks, attorneys, tourists with their phones half raised, unsure whether to record or retreat. 71 hours from now, this woman would sit on the highest bench in the state of Florida. She would wear black robes and a white collar. She would help decide the fates of millions. But right now, right here, she was being treated like a criminal, and the man doing it had no idea what he had just started. "Ma'am." A second voice, female, sharp with authority. "I don't know how you got past security, but housekeeping is in the basement." The woman with the reading glasses turned her head slowly. The administrative clerk who had spoken, Heather Langford, according to the nameplate visible through the glass window, stood with her arms crossed, chin lifted, radiating the particular satisfaction of someone who had caught an intruder. "I'm not with housekeeping." "Then what are you?" Heather stepped closer, heels clicking against marble. "Because you're certainly not an attorney, and you're definitely not supposed to be wandering around my courthouse like you own the place." The woman's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She reached into her pocket. Brick's hand flew to his holster. "I said don't. I'm getting my phone." Her voice was calm, level. The voice of someone who had learned, through decades of practice, that volume was rarely the most effective weapon. "I have been recording since I walked in. Your badge number is 4731. The time is now 4:48. You have not informed me why I am being detained or what crime I am suspected of committing. Under Florida Statute Section 901.151, you need reasonable suspicion of criminal activity to detain me." Brick's hand hovered. Heather's smirk flickered. And somewhere in the back of the crowd, a courthouse custodian named Caleb Toomey watched the scene unfold and recognized something in the woman's posture that no one else seemed to notice. She wasn't afraid. She was waiting. Chapter 8. If you're already hooked, hit that subscribe button now, because what happened next changed everything. 18 hours earlier, the Hampton Inn off Appalachia Parkway wasn't the kind of place dignitaries stayed. No valet parking, no room service after 10 p.m., no one asking for autographs in the lobby. That was precisely why Ivory Stratton had chosen it. She checked in at 6:22 on Thursday evening, paying cash for incidentals. The clerk, a young man with a patchy beard and a coffee stain on his polo, barely glanced at her driver's license before sliding the keycard across the counter. "Second floor, east side, elevators around the corner." "Thank you." She didn't correct him when he pronounced her name wrong. Didn't mention that in 3 days, that name would be on every news station in the state. Didn't say anything at all except, "Have a good evening," as she wheeled her modest suitcase toward the elevator. The room was clean, functional, anonymous. Twin beds with brown comforters, a desk bolted to the wall, a window overlooking the parking lot. She requested a room change. "East-facing, second floor," she told the front desk. "If possible." It was possible. The clerk didn't ask why, didn't notice the way she paused at the top of the stairwell, counting steps to the exit. Didn't see her test the emergency door, confirming it opened from the inside without an alarm. Old habits. The kind formed by years of walking into buildings where not everyone wanted her to walk out. She unpacked methodically. One garment bag, sealed, hung in the closet without being opened. 3 days of casual clothes folded into drawers. A leather folio with documents she would review each night. The contents, known only to her, and a very small circle of people who had been sworn to silence. Dinner was room service. Grilled chicken, steamed vegetables, no alcohol. She ate while reading, a pen in her hand, making notes in margins that would never be seen by anyone else. At 9:15, her phone buzzed. A text from an unlisted number. Confirmed for Monday, 9 a.m. Rear entrance. Security escort will meet you. She typed back, acknowledged, nothing else. No emojis, no exclamation points, no looking forward to it. Just acknowledgement, confirmation, the bare minimum required. She set the phone aside and returned to her documents. Outside, the Tallahassee night was quiet. Somewhere across the city, in a courthouse she would soon command, Heather Langford was finishing her shift. Brick Hadley was reviewing the next day's security protocols. Solomon Whitmore was drafting a dissent that would never be published. None of them knew what was coming. None of them had any idea that the woman in the Hampton Inn, eating grilled chicken and reading briefs, would be sitting beside them on the bench in 72 hours. And none of them, not one, would have believed it if they'd been told. Friday morning, 9:15 a.m. The Florida Supreme Court building rose from the Tallahassee skyline like a monument to authority. White columns, marble steps, marbles. The kind of architecture designed to make ordinary citizens feel small. Ivory Stratton stood at the base of those steps and felt nothing. She had argued cases in buildings like this for 30 years, had sat on the bench in the 11th Circuit for 7, had learned long ago that marble was just rock and columns were just decoration. The power was in the people inside, and the people inside could be wrong. She walked up the steps slowly, taking her time. Today was not about rushing. Today was about observation, about understanding the terrain she would soon inherit. She wore slacks, a cream blouse, the same cardigan from the night before. No jewelry except a practical watch, the kind that kept time, nothing more. No briefcase, just a crossbody purse with her wallet, her phone, and a copy of the visitor brochure she'd downloaded from the court's website. The entrance had 3 lines: attorneys, staff, public. She joined the public line. The attorney entrance would have been faster. A flash of her bar card, currently tucked in a drawer back at the hotel, and she'd have bypassed the screening entirely. But that wasn't the point. She wanted to see what ordinary citizens experienced, what black citizens experienced. She wanted to know if the courthouse she was about to lead treated everyone the same. ID and purpose of visit? The security officer was young, bored, white. His eyes flicked to her face, then down to the license she extended. Touring the building. He typed something, squinted at his screen. Typed again. This your current address? Yes. And you're just touring? Yes. Something in his expression shifted. Not hostility exactly, more like confusion. Like he couldn't quite place her in a category that made sense. Go ahead. He waved her through the metal detector. She collected her purse, nodded politely, and walked into the atrium. The courthouse opened around her like a cathedral. Vaulted ceilings, marble floors that echoed with every footstep, portraits lining the walls, former justices, former governors, former men of power staring down from gilt frames with expressions of permanent judgment. She walked slowly, counted the portraits. All men until 1985. The first woman, Rosemary Barkett, smiled down from a frame near the east corridor. Ivory had read her opinions, admired her courage, had cited her dissents in her own rulings more than once. There were 6 justices currently sitting, 1 seat vacant, her seat. But no one here knew that. No one here looked at the black woman in the cardigan and saw a future colleague. They saw what they expected to see: a tourist, a visitor, someone who didn't quite belong. A clerk passed, did a double take, kept walking. A security guard watched her from the information desk, hand resting near his radio. An elderly white woman, tourist probably, stopped in front of her with a hesitant smile. "Excuse me, do you know where the restrooms are?" Ivory pointed. "Down that corridor, past the clerk's office." "Thank you so much." The woman walked away, didn't notice the pause, didn't wonder why she had asked the only black face in the atrium for directions instead of the security guard standing 10 feet away. Ivory noticed. She noticed everything. The administrative clerk's window was a fortress of bureaucratic power. Glass partition, speak-through grill, a sign that read, "Take a number," in letters that brooked no argument. Ivory didn't take a number. There was no one else waiting. She approached the window. The woman on the other side, Heather Langford, according to the nameplate, didn't look up. Mid-50s, blonde hair precisely styled, reading glasses on a chain that matched her earrings. The kind of woman who had learned to wield paperwork the way generals wielded armies. "Can I help you?" Not a question, a statement. The tone of someone who had no intention of actually helping. "I was hoping to visit the law library. What are the public hours?" Heather looked up. Her eyes traveled from Ivory's face to her cardigan to her sensible flats, cataloging every detail with the precision of a customs inspector. "The library isn't a tourist attraction, it's a working facility." "I understand, but surely there are provisions for researchers. You need a valid Florida bar number. Do you have one?" Ivory did. Had maintained her license for 32 years, but her bar card was in the hotel drawer, deliberately left behind. "Not with me." "Then I can't help you." Heather turned back to her computer, dismissal complete. "Public hours are posted online." "I'm already here. I was hoping—" "The website," Heather's voice sharpened, "is where you'll find that information. We don't give special tours just because someone wanders in off the street." Ivory felt the familiar heat rising in her chest, the anger she had learned to compress, to channel, to transform into something more useful than rage. "I see. Thank you for your time." She turned to leave. Behind her, Heather muttered to a colleague, not quite quietly enough, "Some people think they can just wander in anywhere." The colleague laughed. Ivory kept walking, her jaw tight, her hands steady. She had dealt with worse, would deal with worse again. This was nothing, a minor slight, a petty cruelty, the kind of thing that happened to black women in professional spaces every single day. But she remembered the name. Heather Langford. She would remember it for a long time.
Wildlife
The
battles
next 2
always
hours
make us
passed without
curious and
incident.
excited.
She toured the
Unique
public
and attractive
galleries,
battles.
read every
But it
plaque,
is difficult
sat in
to
the empty
watch live
courtroom during a
because they're
recess,
very
and
dangerous.
studied the bench where she would
So,
soon sit.
witness the 15
Imagined
ruthless
herself in
animal
the center
battles
chair,
captured through
though
this
she knew that
video.
would take years. Imagined the attorneys who would argue before her, the cases that would shape lives. She thought about the portrait wall, about adding her face to that row of men. At 11:40, she wandered toward the east wing. The archive corridor was quiet. Soft lighting, climate-controlled air, the hush of history preserved behind glass doors. A display case showed the original 1845 state constitution, yellowed pages behind protective glass. She stopped to look. Didn't touch the door. Didn't try the handle. Simply stood, reading through the glass, thinking about the men who had written those words and the millions of people those words had failed to protect. 43 seconds. That was how long she stood there. She didn't know yet that a camera was recording, that 43 seconds would become evidence, that standing still and looking at history would be transformed, in official reports, into something suspicious. "Can I help you?" The voice came from behind. Ivory turned. A woman in her 30s stood 5 feet away, court reporter badge visible on her lanyard. Brown hair, pleasant features, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Shiloh Westbrook. The name on the badge. "Just admiring the display." Ivory gestured toward the Constitution. "Is this area open for tours?" "No, this is a restricted area." "I understand. The sign is clear." She stepped back, showing her hands in the universal gesture of no harm intended. "Beautiful collection, though." Shiloh didn't respond, didn't smile. Just stood there, watching. until Ivory had walked 10 feet down the corridor. Only then did she hear footsteps retreating behind her. She didn't look back. 12:15 p.m. The atrium bench was hard, cold, impersonal. Ivory sat with the visitor brochure open on her lap, pretending to read while actually observing the flow of people through the space. Attorneys with briefcases, walking fast, talking faster. Clerks shuttling documents between offices. Security guards standing at intervals, eyes moving constantly. One guard had been watching her for 12 minutes. She'd noticed him notice her when she sat down. Noticed him speak into his radio. Noticed him cross to a different position that gave him a better angle on her location. Now his shadow fell across her brochure. "Ma'am." She looked up. Deputy Marshal Brick Hadley filled her field of vision. Mid-40s, built like a linebacker gone slightly soft, crew cut just beginning to gray at the temples. His badge said, "Supervisor." His posture said he was used to people doing what he told them. "Yes?" "I need to see your visitor pass." She closed the brochure. "I checked in at the front desk. They didn't issue a pass." "Everyone gets a pass." His voice was flat, certain. "Did you go through the main entrance?" "Yes, 9:17 this morning. The officer scanned my license and waved me through." "Which officer?" She described him. Young, bored, coffee stain on his polo. Brick reached for his radio, muttered something into it. Static. A response she couldn't hear. His expression darkened. "There's no record of your entry." Impossible. She'd watched the officer type, watched him scan her license, had stood there for 30 seconds while he processed her information. "That's incorrect. I'd like to speak with your supervisor." Brick's jaw tightened. "I am the supervisor. And you're in an unauthorized area without credentials. This is the public atrium." She kept her voice level. "The brochure indicates..." "The brochure doesn't override security protocols." He took a step closer. Close enough that she could smell his breath. Coffee and something sour. "I need you to come with me." "Am I being detained?" The question hung in the air. Brick's eyes narrowed. The silence stretched 3 seconds. 4. "I'm asking you to cooperate with a security inquiry."
Wildlife
That's not
battles
an
always
answer.
make us curious
Under
and
Florida
excited.
Statute Section
Unique and attractive
901.151,
battles.
you need
But it is
reasonable
difficult to
suspicion of
watch
criminal
live
activity
because
to
they're
detain
very
me.
dangerous.
What is your reasonable
So,
suspicion?
witness the 15 ruthless
She
animal
watched his
battles
face,
captured through
watched
this
the
video.
calculation happening behind his eyes. Surprise that she knew the law, irritation that she wasn't complying, the slow realization that this wasn't going to be easy. You were observed near a restricted area. That's suspicion enough. Observed near, not in. There's no crime in looking through a glass door. His hand moved toward her arm. She didn't step back, didn't raise her voice, just looked at his hand, then at his face, and spoke clearly enough for anyone nearby to hear. "If you're going to touch me, deputy, I need you to state, on the record, whether I am under arrest and what charges you are bringing." Brick's hand stopped, mid-air, frozen. Around them, the atrium had gone quiet. Clerks watching, attorneys pausing mid-stride, a security camera blinking red in the corner. "Ma'am," his voice was tight, "I'm asking you, one more time, to come with me voluntarily. And I'm telling you, one more time, that I have broken no law and violated no policy. I am a citizen who entered through the public entrance, passed through security screening, and have spent the last 2 hours in areas clearly marked as open to the public." She paused. "But if you insist on escalating this, I want a witness, I want documentation, and I want you to understand that I am recording this entire conversation on my phone." Her hand moved toward her pocket. Brick's hand closed around her wrist. Hard. Too hard. Pain shot up her arm, sharp and immediate. His fingers dug into the soft tissue above her pulse point, grinding against bone. "I said..." "You're hurting me." Her voice was still calm, still level, but something in it made Brick pause. And that's when Heather Langford appeared. Bossy. The administrative clerk cut through the gathering crowd like a shark through shallow water. Her heels struck the marble with a sound like judgment. What's going on here? Brick didn't release Ivory's wrist. Unauthorized visitor. Processing her now. I knew it. Heather's face lit up with vindication. I knew there was something off about her. I saw her earlier asking questions, pretending she belonged. She turned to address the crowd. Clerks, attorneys, tourists, anyone within earshot. This is exactly why we need stricter protocols. These people just walk in like they own the place. These people. The words landed like a slap. Ivory felt every eye in the atrium swivel toward her. Felt the weight of judgment, of assumption, of a verdict rendered before any evidence was considered. I am a citizen visiting a public building. Her voice was steady, but something had cracked inside her. Something she had kept carefully controlled for 52 years. Citizens, sign in. Heather stepped closer, close enough that Ivory could smell her perfume, something floral and expensive. Citizens get passes. You are trespassing. The word echoed off the marble. Trespassing. A crime. Said loud enough for everyone to hear, loud enough to become truth simply by repetition. That's defamation. Ivory's voice hardened. I have committed no crime. I am being detained without cause. And you, she looked directly at Heather, have just publicly accused me of a crime you have no evidence I committed, in front of at least 30 witnesses. Heather's smile faltered. Brick's grip tightened, and from the edge of the crowd, a new voice cut through the tension. What's the situation here? The attorney who stepped forward wore a gray suit and burgundy tie, Florida bar pin gleaming on his lapel, silver watch, polished shoes, the easy confidence of someone who had never doubted his right to be in any room he entered. Cassian Mercer, senior appellate counsel. Ivory had read his briefs, had disagreed with most of them, had noted his tendency to use procedural technicalities to protect clients who deserved conviction. She had never expected to meet him like this. Security matter, Mr. Mercer. Brick's voice shifted, slightly deferential, slightly nervous. The tone of someone addressing a superior. We've got it handled. Cassian studied the scene. Brick's hand on the woman's wrist. Heather hovering like a vulture. The crowd watching with the hungry attention of people who smelled drama. Has she been Mirandized? A reasonable question. Brick shook his head. Then you haven't arrested her. Cassian turned to Ivory, his expression impossible to read. Which means you're free to leave, unless you want to stay and make this worse for yourself. It was a trap, a neatly baited trap. If she left now, there would be no documentation, no witnesses who could be compelled to testify, no record of what had happened beyond her word against theirs. She didn't take the bait. I'd like the incident formally documented, including your name, sir. Cassian's eyebrows rose. Cassian Mercer, senior appellate counsel. And you are? A visitor who followed every posted protocol and is now being publicly accused of trespassing. If you followed protocol, you have nothing to worry about. His eyes traveled over her appearance, the cardigan, the sensible flats, the absence of any marker of professional status. But this, he gestured vaguely at her person, doesn't exactly inspire confidence, does it? The insult was subtle, polished, the kind that could be denied if challenged. But Ivory heard it. So did everyone watching. My clothing is not a crime, Mr. Mercer. Neither is my presence in a public building. But false imprisonment is. She turned to Brick. Are you going to release my wrist, deputy? Or are we going to stand here until my hand goes numb and I have documentation of assault? Brick's grip loosened, then tightened again, then slowly released. 5 red marks were visible on her skin. She raised her wrist, making sure the camera in the corner captured the image. The time is 12:22 p.m. I have just been physically restrained without cause by Deputy Marshal Brick Hadley, badge number 4731. The clerk who accused me of trespassing is Heather Langford. The attorney who suggested I should leave rather than document this incident is Cassian Mercer. I am requesting formally that this incident be recorded and that I receive copies of all security footage covering this atrium from 12:15 to the present." Silence. Brick looked at Heather. Heather looked at Cassian. Cassian's expression had gone very, very still. "You seem to know a lot about legal procedure," he said slowly, "for a tourist." I read the brochure carefully. It wasn't an answer. They both knew it. But before anyone could respond, another voice cut through the tension. This one deeper, older, carrying the weight of authority that made everyone in the atrium straighten instinctively. "Brick, what's this about?" This woman was about to go from being treated like a criminal to sitting on the highest bench in Florida. If you want to see how that happens, make sure you're subscribed, because the reveal is going to be incredible. Justice Solomon Whitmore was 63 years old, silver hair, judicial bearing, 19 years on the Florida Supreme Court. He wore shirt sleeves and carried a coffee cup, clearly interrupted in his afternoon routine. Everyone in the atrium knew who he was. His portrait hung on the wall not 50 feet away. Ivory knew him too, had studied his opinions, had agreed with some, strongly opposed others. Had read, just 3 months ago, the letter he had written to the Judicial Nominating Commission expressing concerns about the current slate of candidates, concerns that, upon careful reading, seemed primarily focused on candidates who didn't look like him. She was one of those candidates. "Security matter, Justice Whitmore." Brick had gone rigid with deference. "Unauthorized visitor, possible archive tampering." Whitmore's eyes moved to Ivory, studied her with the practiced assessment of someone who had spent decades evaluating people from the bench. "Has she been charged?" "Not yet, sir. We're documenting the incident." "And what incident would that be?" Brick hesitated. Heather stepped forward. "She was in the archive corridor, Your Honor, where she had no business being." "In the corridor? Or in the archive?" Another hesitation. "In the corridor." Whitmore's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "Is being in a corridor a crime now, Heather?" "She was observed near a restricted area, Your Honor. Deputy Hadley made the determination that—" "Deputy Hadley isn't a lawyer." Whitmore turned to Ivory. "Do you have an attorney?" "I haven't been told I need one. I haven't been told what law I'm accused of breaking." "You're not accused of anything. Yet. This is an inquiry. An inquiry that involves physical detention." She raised her wrist, showing the red marks. "And public accusations of trespassing." Whitmore looked at her wrist, at Brick, at the gathering crowd. For a moment, just a moment, something that might have been uncertainty flickered across his face. Then it was gone. "Brick, process this by the book. If there's no evidence of actual violation, release her with a warning. We don't need the paperwork." He turned to leave. Stopped. Turned back. "You seem to know a lot about court rules for a tourist." I read the brochure carefully. The same non-answer she had given Cassian. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "What's your name?" "Ivory Stratton." The name meant nothing to him. She could see it in his face, the complete absence of recognition. He didn't know, hadn't been told, hadn't read the confirmation notice that had been quietly filed with the Senate 3 weeks ago. "Well, Ms. Stratton." His voice carried the particular condescension of someone who believed they were being generous. "I suggest you be more careful about where you wander. Not everyone in this building is as patient as I am." He walked away. She watched him go, noting the slight stiffness in his gait, the coffee cup held carefully to avoid spilling, the way subordinates parted before him like water before a ship. In 70 hours, she would sit beside him. He had no idea, and she intended to keep it that way. The security office was a windowless room near the marshal's station. Metal table, 2 chairs, fluorescent lights that buzzed with a frequency designed to slowly drive occupants insane. Brick pointed to a chair. Sit. Ivory remained standing. I prefer not to. I said sit down. His hand landed on her shoulder. Pushed. Hard. Her knees buckled. She caught herself on the table, barely avoiding slamming her chin against the edge. Deputy Hadley. Her voice was tight with controlled fury. You just battered me. Again. While your body camera is running. She pointed to the device clipped to his chest, the red light blinking steadily. Brick's face went pale, then red, then pale again. I was securing a detainee. You pushed a 52-year-old woman into a chair hard enough to nearly cause injury. That's not securing. That's assault under Florida Statute Section 784.03. She sat, because her legs were shaking, and she'd be damned if she'd give him the satisfaction of seeing her unsteady. The time is 12:34 p.m. I am now being held in what appears to be a security holding room. I have not been Mirandized, charged with any crime, or informed of my rights. I am requesting, again, that all documentation of this incident be preserved, and that I be allowed to contact an attorney. Brick's jaw worked. She could see him calculating how much trouble he was in, how to minimize it, whether he could still spin this as a routine security matter. You were in a restricted area. I was in a corridor, looking through a glass door. The security camera, Archive Corridor Camera 7, I believe, will show exactly that. He stared at her. How do you know the camera designation? I looked up. She held his gaze. The label is printed on the housing. Standard practice for Florida state facilities, per Florida Administrative Code Section 21.004. More silence. Then Brick turned and walked out of the room, slamming the door behind him. She was alone. She pulled her phone from her pocket. They hadn't confiscated it, which was either an oversight or a deliberate decision to avoid additional complaints, and checked the recording. Still running. 93 minutes of audio, beginning the moment she'd walked into the courthouse that morning. She stopped the recording, started a new one, began speaking softly, documenting everything. Times, names, badge numbers, exact quotes where she could remember them. Her watch, an old model, outdated, the kind no one would think to confiscate, had a voice memo function. She activated it as a backup. Then she sat back and waited. She was good at waiting. She'd been waiting her whole life. The door opened at 12:57. Shiloh Westbrook entered, clipboard in hand, expression professionally blank. Deputy Hadley, I need to file a supplemental report. Brick followed behind her, closing the door. Go ahead. Shiloh looked at Ivory. Ivory looked back. At approximately 11:42 a.m., Shiloh read from handwritten notes. I observed the subject attempting to access the archive corridor. When I approached, she was handling the door mechanism. The lie was smooth, practiced, the kind of lie that had been constructed specifically to survive legal scrutiny. That's false. Shiloh didn't blink. The camera shows you near the door. What it doesn't capture is the angle of your hands. My hands were at my sides. I never touched. What the camera shows, Shiloh continued as if Ivory hadn't spoken, is open to interpretation. What I observed as a trained court officer is that the subject appeared to be manipulating the door handle. Plausible deniability. Ivory recognized the technique, had seen it used in dozens of cases by witnesses who understood exactly how to craft testimony that was technically true while being functionally false. You're filing a fraudulent report. I'm documenting my observations. Shiloh's smile was thin and cold. If you disagree, you're welcome to file a counterstatement, but that would require you to explain why you were in a restricted area in the first place. The trap was elegant. Fight the report, and she'd have to justify her presence near the archive. Accept the report, and it became part of the official record. Either way, she lost. I'll take the counterstatement option. Shiloh's smile flickered, just slightly. Suit yourself. Deputy Hadley will provide the form. She left. The door closed. Brick remained, arms crossed, watching. Forms on the table. He jerked his chin toward a stack of papers. Fill it out. We'll process it. Process it how? However the system decides to process it. She reached for the form. Generic, pre-printed, boxes for dates and times and nature of dispute. At the bottom, in small print, filing a false counterstatement is a violation of Florida Statute Section 837.06 and may result in criminal prosecution. The threat was clear. Challenge the official report and risk being charged with perjury. She filled out the form anyway. Every box, every detail. Names, times, exact quotes where she could remember them. At the bottom, she wrote, I request preservation of all security footage from Archive Corridor Camera 7, timestamps 11:40 to 11:45 a.m., as evidence supporting this counterstatement. Brick took the form, read it. His expression tightened. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I'm exercising my legal rights. If that's hard, the problem isn't with me. He left. She waited. The fluorescent lights buzzed. 1:45 p.m. The door opened again. This time, it wasn't Brick or Shiloh. It was a face she recognized, had seen on the wall of the atrium not 2 hours ago. Justice Solomon Whitmore stood in the doorway. Still here, Ms. Stratton? She didn't stand. Her legs were tired, and she was done performing deference for people who had given her none. Still haven't been told why I'm being held, Your Honor. Whitmore stepped into the room, closed the door. The space felt smaller with him in it. I reviewed Deputy Hadley's report and the court reporter's supplemental statement. Did you also review the security footage? Not yet. Then you've heard one side of the story. Would you like to hear the other? His eyes narrowed. That sounds like something a lawyer would say. Does it? The silence stretched. Whitmore was studying her, the same way he might study a defendant who had said something unexpected, trying to categorize her, to fit her into a box that made sense. She didn't fit, and she had no intention of helping him figure out why. Ms. Stratton. His voice shifted, slightly softer, slightly more patient. The tone of someone explaining something to a child. I understand that this has been an unpleasant experience, but the courthouse has security protocols for a reason. When someone behaves in a way that triggers those protocols, consequences follow. That's not prejudice. That's procedure. And what behavior did I exhibit, Your Honor, that triggered these protocols? You were observed near a restricted area. I was observed standing in a public corridor, looking through a glass door at a historical display. Is that the standard now? That standing and looking constitutes suspicious behavior? In certain contexts. What contexts? She leaned forward. Please, Your Honor, I'm genuinely curious. What context transforms standing in a corridor into a security threat? Because from where I'm sitting, the only context that seems relevant is the color of my skin. Whitmore's face went still. Be very careful, Ms. Stratton. About what? About naming what everyone in this building is already thinking? About pointing out that I've been detained, physically battered, and publicly accused of crimes I didn't commit? All because I'm a black woman who didn't look like she belonged? That's an extremely serious accusation. It's an extremely accurate description of what has happened to me in the last 2 hours. She held his gaze. You asked what behavior triggered these protocols. The answer is being black, being present, being visible in a space where people like me are expected to be invisible. Whitmore said nothing. The silence was heavy, oppressive, the kind of silence that fills a room when something true has been spoken and no one wants to acknowledge it. Finally, he turned toward the door. I'll have Deputy Hadley process your release, no charges. And the documentation? Will be handled. Handled how? He paused, hand on the door handle. Are you questioning me? I'm asking a question. There's a difference. Another silence. Then, without looking back, "You have a lot of nerve, Ms. Stratton. I hope, for your sake, that nerve serves you well." He left. She stayed seated, and she thought about nerve. About the nerve it took to walk into spaces where you weren't wanted. About the nerve it took to challenge people who held power over you. About the nerve it took to be a black woman in America who refused to apologize for existing. Solomon Whitmore thought he knew something about nerve. He had no idea. 2:30 p.m. Brick returned, agitation radiating from every line of his body. "I ran your license again. Front desk still has no record of your entry." "Then your system has a problem." "The system doesn't have problems." He stepped closer. "People have problems. People who try to sneak into buildings where they don't belong." "I didn't sneak. I walked through the front door, showed my ID, and was waved through by your own officer." "Prove it." "The security footage will prove it." His smile was ugly. "Funny thing about security footage, sometimes it gets corrupted. Sometimes the timestamps don't line up. Sometimes things just disappear." She understood the threat, understood it clearly. The footage that could exonerate her might never be produced. The record of her entry might vanish. She could fight this for months, years, and never get justice. Unless she had something they didn't know about. "Deputy Hadley," her voice was calm, "I'm going to ask you one more time. What are you charging me with?" "Trespassing under Florida Statute 810.08. Based on what probable cause?" "Absence of entry records." "The absence of a record is your system's failure, not my crime. I entered through the public line, submitted to screening, and was waved through by a uniformed officer. If you choose to arrest me based on your own administrative error, you will be committing false imprisonment under Florida Statute Section 787.02. Brick's face reddened. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm informing you of the law, something you should probably know given your position." He reached for her wrist. She moved. Not away, into the movement, turning her body so that his grip slid off harmlessly. A defensive technique, subtle and practiced. The kind learned in self-defense courses designed for people who might need to protect
Wildlife
themselves
battles
without
always make
escalating
us
violence.
curious and excited.
Brick's hand
Unique and
closed on
attractive
air.
battles.
"What
But it
the?
is difficult to
I'm
watch
not
live
resisting.
because
I'm
they're
protecting
very
my joints from
dangerous.
hyperextension.
So,
If you insist
witness
on
the
handcuffs,
15
I'll
ruthless
comply
animal
with hands
battles
in front
captured through
as
this
permitted
video.
for nonviolent detainees under your own departmental policy." She extended her wrists, positioned together, in front of her body. Brick stared. "How do you know our policy?" "It's posted in the lobby of this office, right next to the fire evacuation map." More staring. Then, grudgingly, he produced handcuffs, clicked them around her wrists, too tight. Deliberately, she could feel the metal biting into skin, and stepped back. "For the record." She looked directly at his body camera. "I am complying peacefully. The time is 2:33 p.m. The handcuffs have been applied at a tightness that will likely cause bruising. I request that this be noted in any official documentation." Brick said nothing. He led her out of the security office, through a corridor she hadn't seen before, toward a door marked "Temporary Holding." The door opened onto a cell. Gray walls, metal bench. One camera in the corner, red light blinking. Inside. She stepped in. The door clanged shut behind her, and she was alone. The holding cell was cold. Not cold enough to cause harm. That would be actionable. But cold enough to be uncomfortable. Cold enough to send a message. You don't belong here. You're not wanted here. You're nothing. Ivory sat on the metal bench and began to document. Her phone had been confiscated at some point during the walk. She wasn't sure when, hadn't felt it leave her pocket. But her watch was still on her wrist. The voice memo function still active. She spoke softly. Time, date, sequence of events. Names, badge numbers, exact quotes. 12:34 p.m. Deputy Hadley pushed me into a chair with sufficient force to nearly cause injury. His exact words were, "I said, sit down." His body camera was active, red light visible. She continued for 10 minutes, then stopped, saved, started a new memo. Better to have multiple files, harder to claim corruption if there were multiple sources. She thought about what would happen next. Best case, they would release her with a warning, try to sweep the whole thing under the rug, hope she didn't pursue it. Worst case, they would charge her, book her, let her spend the weekend in county lockup while her investiture happened without her. She wasn't sure which outcome she preferred. Part of her, the part that had spent 30 years fighting for justice, that had watched too many cases dismissed on technicalities, that had seen too many victims abandoned by the system, wanted them to charge her, wanted the documentation, wanted the paper trail. But another part, the part that had worked so hard to reach this moment, that had sacrificed so much for the chance to sit on the highest bench in the state, knew what a scandal would mean. Headlines, investigations, questions about her judgment. Was it worth it? Was any of this worth it? She thought about the portraits on the wall, about Rosemary Barkett's smile, about the seat that was waiting for her. Then she thought about the marks on her wrist, about Heather's sneer, about Brick's hands. If she let this go, nothing would change. If she fought, everything might. She closed her eyes and made her decision. 4 p.m. A noise at the door, the clank of a lock disengaging. Ivory opened her eyes as a custodian entered. Black man, late 50s, courthouse uniform, pushing a mop and bucket with the weary efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Caleb Toomey. She remembered the name from the outline. No, from the crowd. He had been watching. She was sure of it now. Had seen his face at the edge of the atrium, watching the confrontation with an expression that held more than casual curiosity. He didn't look at her as he mopped, just worked steadily, moving toward the camera's blind spot. She had identified it an hour ago, a 4-foot section in the corner where the lens couldn't reach. "They put you in holding over a visitor pass?" His voice was quiet, barely above a whisper. "Apparently." "That's not right." She didn't respond, waited. He paused near the blind spot, adjusted his grip on the mop. "I saw you this morning, in the atrium, looking at the portraits." "I was. You looked at them like you were counting something." The observation was sharp, too sharp for casual notice. "I was counting." "Counting what?" "How many looked like me?" He nodded slowly, as if this was the answer he had expected. "My name's Caleb. I've worked here 23 years. He met her eyes for the first time. "I've seen a lot of people come through that don't belong. You're not one of them." She held his gaze. "How can you tell?" "The way you stood, the way you talked to them." A ghost of a smile. "The way you didn't flinch when that fool put his hands on you." "Should I have flinched?" "Most people do." He wrung out the mop. "Most people who end up in this room, they're scared, or angry, or both. You're neither." "I'm both." "Maybe, but it doesn't show." He paused. "Whatever they think they know about you, ma'am, they don't know enough." Ma'am, not lady, not her first name, not the casual dismissal she had received from everyone else in this building. Ma'am, with weight, with respect, like he knew something they didn't. "Thank you, Caleb." He nodded, finished mopping, pushed his bucket toward the door. "You'll be fine," he said, without looking back. "I've got a feeling about that." The door closed behind him. She sat alone, and for the first time in 5 hours, she smiled. 5:15 p.m. The door opened. Brick stood there, expression sour. "You're being released. No charges." She stood slowly. Her legs ached. Her wrists throbbed where the handcuffs had bitten. "On what basis?" "Does it matter? You're free to go." "It matters. I want the documentation." He handed her a form. "Detained and released. No probable cause established." She read it. Her name spelled wrong, Ivory Stratford instead of Stratton. Her address listed as unknown. The narrative section read, "Subject was detained for security inquiry following observed suspicious behavior near restricted archive area. Subject was cooperative. No evidence of trespassing or tampering found. Subject released with warning." Warning. She was warned, as if she had done something wrong. I'd like to correct the spelling of my name. That's what it says on the form. The form is wrong. My name is Stratton. Stratton. Brick's jaw tightened. I'll make a note. I'd like the correction made on the official document before I sign. You're not required to sign. Then I won't. But I want the correction noted anyway. He stared at her. She stared back. Finally, he reached for the form, crossed out Stratford, wrote Stratton in cramped handwriting, and shoved it back at her. Happy? Documented. She took the form, folded it carefully, placed it in her purse, which had been returned without her phone. I'll need my phone. Processing. How long? However long it takes. She considered pushing, decided against it. The phone had 93 minutes of audio, but the memory was backed up to the cloud. She could access it from any device. Fine. I'll pick it up Monday. Something flickered in Brick's eyes. Monday. 3 days away. Sure. Monday. She walked out of the holding area, down the corridor, through the security office. At the door to the main atrium, she paused, turned back. Deputy Hadley. He looked at her. You have a good weekend. She walked out before he could respond. The administrative clerk's window was closing when Ivory arrived. Heather Langford was gathering her things, ready to leave for the weekend. I'd like to file a public records request. Heather didn't look up. Office is closed. Florida Statute 11907 requires you to acknowledge receipt of a request during business hours. It's 5:45. You close at 6. Heather looked up. Recognition flickered, and with it, something else. Wariness. What records? Security footage from Archive Corridor Camera 7. Timestamp 11:40 to 11:45 a.m. today. Body cam footage from Deputy Marshal Brick Hadley. Timestamp 12:15 to 2:45 p.m. And the visitor log from the main entrance. 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. She slid a handwritten request across the counter. Heather stared at it, at the precise legal language, at the specific statute citations. This will take weeks. Florida law requires response within a reasonable time. For footage at risk of deletion, reasonable means days, not weeks. I'll expect acknowledgement by Monday. Heather's face tightened. Is that a threat? It's an expectation. Have a good weekend, Ms. Langford. She turned and walked toward the exit. The glass doors swung open automatically. Outside, the sun was setting, orange and gold across the Tallahassee sky. She stood on the marble steps of the Florida Supreme Court, the building she would command in 72 hours, and breathed. The air smelled like pine and car exhaust, and the particular humidity of North Florida in January. She breathed again. Then she pulled out her backup phone, a flip phone, ancient and overlooked, kept in an inside pocket of her purse, and made a call. This is Ivory Stratton. I need to speak with the Inspector General for Florida courts, tonight, if possible. A pause on the other end. Ma'am, the office is closed. Tell them it's regarding an incident at the Supreme Court building this afternoon. Tell them I have documentation. Tell them... She paused, choosing her words carefully. That I'll be available to discuss it Monday morning, at the courthouse, where I'll be working. A longer pause. I'll transfer you to the emergency line. She waited. The sun continued to set. The courthouse loomed behind her, all marble and columns and carefully constructed power. She thought about what she was starting, about the chain of events that would follow this phone call, about the investigations, the hearings, the documentation that would pile up until even the most entrenched defenders of the status quo couldn't ignore it. She thought about Brick's hands on her shoulder, about Heather's sneer, about Solomon Whitmore's condescension. They had treated her like she was nothing, like she was less than nothing, like she was a problem to be processed, a nuisance to be removed, a threat to be contained. They had no idea what they had started, and by the time they figured it out, it would be far too late. The moment of truth is coming. When those courthouse doors open Monday morning, everything will change. But first, the story of how one woman's quiet dignity became the most powerful weapon in Florida's legal system. Stay with me. The best is yet to come. That night, Ivory sat in her Hampton Inn room and wrote. Not on her laptop. That could be compromised, hacked, seized as evidence if things went truly sideways. On paper. Lined notebook, black pen, her handwriting small and precise. To the Office of the Inspector General, Florida Courts. She documented everything. Every interaction, every statement, every procedural violation she had observed or experienced. She cited statutes, listed witnesses, named names. At the bottom she wrote, I am filing this complaint in my capacity as a private citizen who was wrongfully detained, physically battered, and publicly defamed by employees of the Florida Supreme Court. The individuals involved demonstrated a pattern of conduct that suggests systemic bias in the application of security protocols, with a particular focus on black visitors to the courthouse. She paused, considered, then added, I will be available to discuss this complaint Monday morning at the Supreme Court building. My contact information is listed above. I can be reached at my chambers. She signed it, just her name. No title, not yet. Then she sealed the letter, addressed it to the JQC, Judicial Qualifications Commission, and set it on the desk to be mailed first thing Saturday morning. Her garment bag hung in the closet, still sealed. She could see the black silk through the thin plastic covering. 72 hours. She thought about what would happen when she walked into that courtroom, about the faces she would see, about the expressions she would read. Brick Hadley, realizing the woman he had pushed into a chair was now his ultimate superior. Heather Langford, understanding that the housekeeper she had tried to summon was about to become the most powerful woman in the building. Solomon Whitmore, grasping that the tourist he had patronized would be sitting beside him on the bench for the next decade or more. She thought about revenge. Then she thought about something better. Justice. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind, not the kind where villains are punished instantly and the hero walks into the sunset, but real justice, the slow, grinding, procedural kind, the kind that required documentation, evidence, patience, the kind that changed systems. She picked up her notebook again and began drafting something else. A memo. For herself. Private. Goals for first 100 days as justice. 1. Review courthouse security protocols. 2. Request audit of detention records for past 5 years. 3. Establish civilian oversight committee for marshal services. 4. Meet with Inspector Generals. Today's incident. 5. Remember their faces. She underlined the last one. Remember their faces. Because they would remember hers. Whether they wanted to or not. Bah. Saturday and Sunday passed quietly. She didn't return to the courthouse, didn't contact anyone involved in Friday's incident, didn't do anything that could be construed as interference or intimidation. She read, walked, prepared, reviewed her swearing-in remarks, made small edits, removed a line about fresh starts that now seemed naive, added a sentence about accountability for all who serve the court, regardless of position. On Saturday afternoon, she visited the Florida State Archives. A different building, different staff, no one who would recognize her. She researched. Read about the first black justice appointed to the Florida Supreme Court, Joseph Hatchett, in 1975. About the resistance he had faced. About the quiet dignity he had maintained. She thought about dignity, about what it meant to maintain it when everyone around you was determined to strip it away. On Sunday evening, her phone buzzed. A text from the clerk administrator. Confirmed for Monday, 9 a.m., rear entrance. Security escort will meet you. She typed back, acknowledged. One question. Will there be any changes to front entrance security staff tomorrow? A long pause. Then, no changes scheduled. Is there a concern? She considered. Decided. No concern. Just curious about procedure. She set the phone aside. Tomorrow. Everything would change tomorrow. Monday morning, 9 a.m. The Florida Supreme Court chamber filled with dignitaries, attorneys, and journalists. Wooden benches, marble columns, the great seal of the state hanging above the empty bench, where justices would soon take their seats. Governor Morrison arrived at 8:45, shaking hands and smiling for cameras. The Attorney General followed. Then 3 former justices, their white hair gleaming under the chandeliers. The gallery was nearly full. In the 4th row, where court employees had been assigned, sat Deputy Marshal Brick Hadley, assigned to event security. Beside him, Administrative Clerk Heather Langford, required to attend all investitures. Court reporter Shiloh Westbrook, documenting for the record. And at the end of the row, in a seat that had been specifically requested, Senior Appellate Counsel Cassian Mercer, representing the Florida Bar. They sat. They waited. They had no idea what was about to happen. Near the side entrance, in a borrowed suit because no one had told him about the dress code, sat Caleb Toomey. 23 years a custodian, never once invited to an investiture. He had asked for the day off. His supervisor had approved it without asking why. Now he sat, hands folded in his lap, watching the doors. Waiting. 9:15. The chamber doors opened. Chief Justice Eleanor Vance entered, silver hair swept back, robes flowing. Behind her, 6 associate justices in full regalia. They climbed to the bench, took their seats. One seat remained empty. Chief Justice Vance lifted her gavel. All rise. The Supreme Court of Florida is now in session. The rustle of 200 people standing. Before we proceed with today's calendar, we have a constitutional duty to fulfill. Her voice carried to every corner of the room. By order of the governor and confirmation of the Florida Senate, we are here to invest a new member of this court. In the 4th row, Heather Langford shifted. Routine, boring, just another ceremony. The Commission on Judicial Qualifications has certified the nominee. The background investigation is complete. The Senate Judiciary Committee voted to confirm on December 14th in a procedural session. Brick Hadley checked his watch. Another hour of standing before he could go back to the security office. It is my honor to present. The side door opened. A woman stepped through. Black silk robes, white collar tabs, the full weight of the office. The Honorable Ivory Stratton, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of Florida. Silence. Absolute, total, devastating silence. And then, Heather Langford's hand flew to her mouth. Brick Hadley's body went rigid, like a man who had just been tasered. Cassian Mercer dropped his pen. It clattered against the wooden bench, the only sound in the frozen room. Shiloh Westbrook stopped typing, stopped moving, stopped breathing. And in the 4th row from the back, near the side entrance, Caleb Toomey smiled. He smiled wide. He smiled like a man who had been waiting 23 years for this moment. And somewhere in the back of the chamber, a photographer from the Tallahassee Democrat captured the image that would make the front page the next morning. Justice Ivory Stratton, walking toward the bench with the serene confidence of a woman who had already won. The woman they had laughed at. The woman they had detained. The woman they had pushed and grabbed and accused and dismissed, taking her seat among them, above them, forever. The silence lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds that felt like 4 centuries. Then the applause began, scattered at first, confused, tentative. People trying to reconcile what they were seeing with what they thought they knew. The woman in the robes, The woman from the atrium. The woman who had been detained, accused, dismissed, pushed into a chair like a common criminal. The same woman, walking toward the bench. Governor Morrison started clapping first, his political instincts kicking in before his brain fully processed the implications. The Attorney General followed. Then the former justices, the journalists, the attorneys filling the gallery, all joining in a wave of applause that swelled to fill the chamber. But not everyone clapped. In the fourth row, Deputy Marshal Brick Hadley's hands remained frozen at his sides. His face had gone the color of old concrete, gray, cracked, crumbling from within. His jaw hung open, just slightly, the expression of a man watching his career collapse in real time. Beside him, Heather Langford sat with both palms pressed flat against the wooden bench, fingers splayed, as if she might float away, or perhaps sink through the floor, if she let go. Her perfectly styled hair seemed suddenly limp. Her pearl earrings caught the light as she trembled. Shiloh Westbrook had stopped typing entirely. Her fingers hovered above her stenotype like a pianist who had forgotten every note she'd ever learned. Tears were already forming in her eyes, not tears of joy. And Cassian Mercer, senior appellate counsel, Florida bar representative, the man who had suggested her clothing didn't inspire confidence, was staring at his dropped pen as if it might contain instructions for how to undo the last 72 hours of his life. Ivory Stratton walked toward the bench. She did not hurry, did not slow, did not acknowledge the applause or the horror or the dawning recognition spreading through the chamber like wildfire through dry brush. Her robes whispered against the marble floor. Her footsteps echoed in the spaces between claps. She climbed the 3 steps to the elevated platform where the justices sat, the same platform she had studied from the gallery just days ago when she was a tourist, a visitor, a problem to be processed. She turned to face the gallery, and for one moment, one brief, crystalline, devastating moment, she looked directly at the 4th row. Brick met her eyes. His face went from gray to white. He looked away first. Heather met her eyes. Her hand flew to her throat, clutching at her pearls like a drowning woman grabbing for a lifeline. Shiloh met her eyes. The tears spilled over, streaming down her cheeks. Cassian didn't meet her eyes at all. He was staring at the floor, at the wall, at the ceiling, anywhere, everywhere, that wasn't the woman he had insulted 72 hours ago. Only Solomon Whitmore, seated 2 chairs to her right, maintained his composure. His face was a mask, judicial, distant, professionally blank. The face of a man who had spent 19 years learning to reveal nothing. But she saw his hands. They were shaking, almost imperceptibly, almost controlled, but shaking. He knew, they all knew, and nothing would ever be the same. Chaptuk. Chief Justice Eleanor Vance stepped forward, a leather-bound book in her hands. "Raise your right hand and repeat after me." Ivory raised her hand, the same wrist that had worn handcuffs, the same wrist that still bore faint bruises, yellow now, fading but visible if you knew where to look, from Brick Hadley's grip. "I, Ivory Stratton. I, Ivory Stratton." Her voice was steady, clear, the voice of a woman who had spent 30 years in courtrooms, who had learned that emotion was a luxury she could not always afford. "Do solemnly swear that I will support, protect, and defend the Constitution and government of the United States and of the state of Florida." She thought about constitutions, about the men who had written them, about the people those documents had failed to protect for generations, about what it meant to swear an oath to a system that had tried to destroy her 3 days ago. "That I am duly qualified to hold office under the Constitution of the state." Duly qualified. She had spent her entire life becoming qualified. Law school at the top of her class. Federal prosecutor for 12 years. 11th Circuit judge for 7. Confirmed by the Senate in a procedural session that had generated barely a whisper of coverage. Qualified. And still they had asked her for her credentials. Still they had pushed her into a chair. Still they had called her suspicious for the crime of standing still. "And that I will well and faithfully perform the duties of Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of Florida." She paused. drew a breath. So help me God. Chief Justice Vance nodded. Her expression was warm but professional, the expression of someone who understood the weight of the moment without fully grasping its particular significance. You may be seated. Ivory sat. The chair was leather, worn smooth by decades of use. She could feel the weight of history pressing against her back. All the justices who had sat here before her, all the decisions that had been made from this exact position, all the lives that had been shaped by words spoken from this bench. She placed her hands on the armrests, felt the wood beneath her fingers, and looked out at the gallery. The applause had faded. Now there was just silence, heavy, expectant, electric. The silence of 200 people waiting to see what would happen next. She let them wait. Then she turned to Chief Justice Vance and nodded, once, a signal that the ceremony could continue. And it did. Photographs were taken. Handshakes exchanged. The formal presentation of the Judicial Commission, parchment paper, gold seal, the governor's signature, was completed with appropriate solemnity. But the real ceremony was over. The real ceremony had happened in those 4 seconds of silence, when everyone who had wronged her understood, finally, completely, irreversibly, exactly who she was, and exactly what they had done. If you're still watching, you already know this story is about to get intense. Hit subscribe now, because what happens when Justice Stratton starts demanding answers will leave you speechless. The reception was held in the courthouse rotunda, beneath the dome that had witnessed a century of Florida history. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across marble floors. White-jacketed servers circulated with champagne flutes and silver trays of canapés. Ivory moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who had attended 1,000 such events, nodding, smiling, accepting congratulations from people she had never met and might never see again. Justice Stratton, what an honor to finally meet you. Justice Stratton, I've followed your 11th Circuit opinions for years. Justice Stratton, my firm would be deeply honored if you might consider... She smiled, nodded, said nothing of substance. Her champagne flute remained full. She had learned, decades ago, never to drink at professional events. Clarity was too valuable to sacrifice for bubbles. But even as she made small talk with dignitaries and deflected invitations from attorneys seeking favor, part of her attention remained fixed on the 4th row, on the people who had not approached her. Brick Hadley had positioned himself near the exit, phone pressed to his ear, speaking urgently to someone she couldn't hear. His free hand kept moving to his holster, an unconscious gesture, the habit of a man who felt threatened. Heather Langford hadn't moved from her spot near the window. She was clutching a glass of water, not champagne, water, and staring into the middle distance with the expression of someone replaying the worst moments of their life on an endless loop. Shiloh Westbrook had left entirely. Slipped out a side door within minutes of the oath's completion. Running, perhaps, or calling a lawyer. Solomon Whitmore stood in the corner nearest the justice's entrance, surrounded by a small cluster of attorneys who seemed to be offering condolences more than congratulations. His expression remained fixed, neutral, giving nothing away. And Cassian Mercer. Cassian Mercer was walking toward her. She watched him approach, watched the calculation in his eyes, the careful composition of his features. A lawyer's face, a politician's face. The face of a man who had realized, belatedly, that damage control was necessary. Justice Stratton. Mr. Mercer. He was holding a champagne flute, full, untouched. A prop, not a beverage. I wanted to offer my congratulations, on behalf of the Florida Bar. Thank you. And I wanted to... He paused, swallowed visibly. I wanted to apologize for my comments on Friday. They were inappropriate and unprofessional, and I deeply regret them. She studied him. The carefully constructed contrition, the lawyer's calculation behind every word, the way his eyes kept flicking to the journalists across the room, checking whether they were close enough to overhear. Which comments specifically, Mr. Mercer? His jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. I made a remark about your appearance, about how it didn't inspire confidence. That was wrong of me. Was it? Yes, absolutely. And I regret it. Do you regret the substance of the remark, Mr. Mercer? Or do you regret that you made it to someone who turned out to be a Supreme Court justice? The question hung between them like a blade. She watched his face, watched the struggle, the instinct to defend himself warring with the knowledge that any defense would make things worse. Both. I regret both. Those are two very different things. She kept her voice low, conversational. No one watching would have known the content of their discussion. One is an apology for causing harm. The other is regret for suffering consequences. Which is it? He was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, he said finally. I honestly don't know. But I'd like to find out. It was, she realized, the first honest thing he had said to her. Then find out. She set down her champagne flute on a passing server's tray. But understand something, Mr. Mercer. What happened on Friday wasn't about me. It was about every black woman who has ever walked into this building and been treated like she didn't belong. Every citizen who has been detained without cause, accused without evidence, dismissed without dignity. I'm not interested in your personal contrition. I'm interested in systemic change, and that's going to require a great deal more than an apology at a cocktail party. She walked away before he could respond. Behind her, she heard him exhale, a long, shaky breath that sounded almost like relief, or perhaps like the beginning of something new. She didn't look back to find out. The reception ended at noon. By 1 p.m., Ivory was in her chambers for the first time, the heavy oak door closing behind her with a sound like a seal being set. The room was large, wood-paneled, lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with Florida reports, Supreme Court precedents, legal treatises spanning 2 centuries of American jurisprudence. A massive mahogany desk dominated one wall, positioned to face the door, the desk of someone accustomed to receiving supplicants. Windows overlooked the interior courtyard, where a fountain splashed softly in the winter sunshine. The previous justice's personal effects had been removed, leaving the space blank, neutral, waiting to be filled. Her space now, her desk, her bookshelves, her windows, her power. She walked to the desk, ran her fingers across the smooth wood surface, sat down in the leather chair and felt it adjust to her weight, accepting her, accommodating her. A knock at the door. Come in. Her law clerk entered, a young woman in her late 20s, dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Dana Prescott, top of her class at Florida State Law. Clerking for a Supreme Court justice was the opportunity of a lifetime. Neither of them had expected the first day to be quite like this. Justice Stratton, Dana's voice was carefully neutral. There are some developments I need to brief you on. Go on. Dana consulted her tablet, scrolling through what appeared to be an extensive list. Deputy Marshal Hadley submitted a request for emergency leave approximately 45 minutes ago, effective immediately.
Wildlife
His supervisor
battles
approved
always
it
make us
within
curious
10
and
minutes.
excited. Unique
Interesting
and
timing.
attractive battles. But it is
Administrative
difficult
Clerk
to watch
Langford
live
called in
because
sick about an
they're
hour
very
ago.
dangerous.
She's citing a
So,
migraine.
witness the 15
Also
ruthless
interesting.
animal battles captured through
Court
this
reporter
video.
Westbrook has not been seen since she left the investiture ceremony. Her office says she's unavailable for the remainder of the day. And Mr. Mercer? No unusual activity from Mr. Mercer, though I did notice he left the reception shortly after speaking with you. Dana looked up from her tablet. There's one more thing. Yes? A reporter from the Tallahassee Democrat, Marcus Webb, he covers courts and legal affairs, has been calling the communications office. He's asking about a public records request filed Friday afternoon by, quote, a detainee at the courthouse. The communications director doesn't know how to respond. Ivory leaned back in her chair. She had expected the story to break eventually. She had not expected it to break on day one. But perhaps it was better this way. Faster. Cleaner. Rip the bandage off before the wound had time to fester. Tell the communications director that I have no comment at this time. Yes, ma'am. But suggest, off the record, not attributable to me, that Mr. Webb might want to file his own FOIA request for security footage from last Friday. Archive Corridor Camera 7, 11:40 to 11:45 a.m., and Deputy Hadley's body cam, 12:15 to 2:45 p.m. Dana's eyebrows rose almost to her hairline. Justice Stratton? Just a suggestion. He can do what he wants with it. Dana made a note. Her expression was carefully blank, but Ivory could see the questions churning behind her eyes. There's one more thing I need, Dana. Yes? The incident report filed Friday. Case number IR 2024-0892. I want to see exactly what was documented, and I want the visitor log from the main entrance, 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. Friday morning. I'll have both within the hour. Thank you. Dana turned to leave, stopped at the door. Justice Stratton? Yes? For what it's worth. She hesitated. I think what happened to you was wrong. Deeply wrong, and I'm glad you're here anyway. Ivory felt something shift in her chest, something warm, something she hadn't expected to feel today. Thank you, Dana. That means more than you know. The clerk left, and Ivory Stratton, Associate Justice of the Florida Supreme Court, sat alone in her chambers and began to plan. The documents arrived at 2:15. Dana placed them on her desk without comment, though her expression suggested she had already read them and had formed opinions she was keeping carefully to herself. Ivory picked up the incident report first. Incident Report IR 2024-0892. Date: Friday, January 10, 2025. Subject: female, black. Age approximately 50 to 55. Physical description: medium height, medium build, gray-streaked hair, casual attire. No visible credentials or identification. No visible credentials. As if her face were not identification enough. As if her presence required documentation to be legitimate. She read on. Detained at 12:32 p.m. for security inquiry following observed suspicious behavior near restricted archive area. Subject was uncooperative during initial contact and made multiple references to legal statutes, suggesting possible legal background or preparation for confrontation. Deputy Hadley made the determination that further inquiry was warranted. Uncooperative. She had asked for the legal basis for her detention. That was uncooperative. Made multiple references to legal statutes. She had cited the law. That was suggesting preparation for confrontation. Subject was escorted to Security Holding Room B for processing. Subject was cooperative during processing but continued to make statements regarding legal rights and procedural violations. Subject was released at 5:15 p.m. after consultation with supervisory staff. Determination: insufficient evidence of trespassing or tampering. Disposition: warning issued. Warning issued. She set down the incident report and picked up the visitor log. The document was a simple spreadsheet printout. Timestamps in one column, names in another, purpose of visit in a third, processing officer's initials in a fourth. She scanned down to 9:17 a.m., and there it was. 9:17 a.m., Stratton, Ivory. Purpose: building tour. Officer, T. Nguyen. Clear as day. Black ink on white paper. Official documentation that she had entered the courthouse legally, properly, following every protocol. The same documentation that Brick Hadley had claimed didn't exist. The same documentation that had been the predicate for her detention. She photographed both documents with her phone. Then she picked up her desk phone and dialed a number she had memorized years ago. Judicial Qualifications Commission. How may I direct your call? This is Ivory Stratton. I filed a complaint on Saturday regarding an incident at the Florida Supreme Court building. I'm calling to confirm receipt and provide updated contact information. Clicking sounds. Typing. Yes, ma'am, I see the complaint here. case number JQC 2024-0119. It's been assigned to Investigator Silas Okonkwo. He should be reaching out to you within. I'm now available at my chambers in the Florida Supreme Court building. My title is Justice Ivory Stratton. I was invested this morning. A long pause. I'm sorry, did you say Justice? Yes, Associate Justice of the Florida Supreme Court. Please update the file accordingly. An even longer pause. Of course, ma'am, Justice Stratton. I'll make absolutely certain that gets noted immediately. Thank you. One more thing. Yes? Please emphasize to Investigator Okonkwo that I am filing this complaint not as a Supreme Court justice, but as a private citizen who was wrongfully detained and battered by court employees. My position on the bench should have no bearing on how this complaint is handled, except to underscore the severity of the systemic failures it reveals. Yes, ma'am. I'll convey that exactly. Thank you. She hung up. Then she turned to her computer and began drafting an email to the Inspector General. Subject line: Formal request for preservation of evidence. Case JQC 2024-0119. The body was detailed, specific, legally precise. I am writing to request immediate preservation of the following materials in connection with the above-referenced complaint. 1. Security footage from Archive Corridor Camera 7, timestamps 11:40 a.m. to 11:45 a.m., January 10, 2025. 2. Body cam footage from Deputy Marshal Brick Hadley, badge number 4731, timestamps 12:15 p.m. to 2:45 p.m., January 10, 2025. 3. Visitor log from the main entrance security checkpoint, January 10, 2025, 9:00 a.m. to 10:00 a.m. 4. All incident reports, supplemental statements, and internal communications related to Incident IR 2024-0892. 5. All email communications sent or received by Deputy Marshal Brick Hadley, Administrative Clerk Heather Langford, and Court Reporter Shiloh Westbrook on January 10, 2025. Please confirm receipt of this request and provide a timeline for evidence preservation. I am prepared to cooperate fully with any investigation. She signed the email, Justice Ivory Stratton. This time, she used her title. Let them know who they were dealing with. Let them understand the stakes. She clicked send, and then she sat back. The first shots had been fired. Now she would see how the system responded. The story broke Wednesday morning. Marcus Webb's byline topped the front page of the Tallahassee Democrat above the fold, where everyone would see it. Supreme Court Justice detained at own courthouse before investiture. Newly confirmed Stratton accused of trespassing, 3 days before taking bench. Security footage contradicts official accounts. The article was thorough, meticulously researched, devastating in its detail. It cited the visitor log showing Ivory's entry at 9:17 a.m., the same log that Brick Hadley had claimed didn't exist. It cited the incident report documenting her 5-hour detention. It cited the warning issued to a woman who had committed no crime. It quoted an anonymous courthouse source, Ivory suspected Caleb Toomey, describing the scene in the atrium in vivid detail. They treated her like a criminal, grabbed her, pushed her, accused her of not belonging, called for housekeeping to collect her like she was trash that needed to be removed, and the whole time she just stood there, calm, dignified, like she knew something they didn't. It quoted Cassian Mercer's terse no comment. It quoted the Florida Courts Marshal Service's carefully worded statement, "We are reviewing the incident and cooperating fully with all appropriate oversight bodies. We have no further comment at this time." It did not quote Brick Hadley, who remained on emergency leave. It did not quote Heather Langford, who was still out sick. It did not quote Shiloh Westbrook, who had retained legal counsel and was declining all interview requests. And it quoted Justice Solomon Whitmore's one-sentence statement, issued through his clerk. "I was not involved in the initial detention and have complete confidence in the ongoing review process." Not involved. Ivory read that line 3 times. He had entered the holding room, had questioned her, had dismissed her concerns, had called her Ms. Stratton, and told her she had a lot of nerve. Not involved. By evening, the story had been picked up by the Associated Press. By Thursday morning, it was on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. By Friday, #Justice Stratton was trending on every social media platform in America. The courthouse was besieged by reporters. The governor's office issued a statement of deep concern. The Florida bar announced a review of member conduct. And in her chambers, Ivory Stratton continued her work, reviewing case files, preparing for oral arguments, doing the job she had spent 30 years earning the right to do. But part of her mind remained on the investigation, on the footage being reviewed, on the statements being taken, on the truth that was slowly, inexorably coming to light. Thursday, 1 week after the incident, investigator Silas Okonkwo requested a meeting. He arrived at her chambers at 2 p.m. precisely, a tall black man in his 50s, broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, with the weary patience of someone who had spent decades sifting through bureaucratic failures and institutional cover-ups to find the kernels of truth buried beneath. Justice Stratton. His handshake was firm, his gaze direct. "Thank you for making time." Investigator Okonkwo. "Please, sit." He sat in the chair facing her desk, placed a thick folder on the polished wood surface. "I've completed my preliminary review of the evidence," he said without preamble. "All of it. Archive corridor footage, atrium footage, holding area footage, Deputy Hadley's body cam, the visitor logs, incident reports, supplemental statements." She waited. "The evidence is consistent with your account. Completely consistent." Something unclenched in her chest. Something she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Tell me what you found." He opened the folder. Archive Corridor Camera 7, timestamp 11:42:03 to 11:42:46. You're visible the entire time. He slid a printout across the desk. A still image, slightly grainy but clear enough. A woman in a cardigan standing at a glass door, hands at her sides. 43 seconds. No contact with the door, no contact with the handle, no contact with the frame. Your hands never move from your sides. And Ms. Westbrook's supplemental statement? His expression tightened. Claims she observed you handling the door mechanism. The footage proves that statement is false. Not ambiguous. False. Materially, demonstrably, provably false. What about Deputy Hadley's body cam? Okonkwo pulled out another document. This is where it becomes unambiguous. He began to read. Timestamp 12:32:07. You state, "I am a citizen visiting a public building." Deputy Hadley does not respond. Timestamp 12:32:15. Administrative Clerk Heather Langford states, "These people just walk in like they own the place." You do not respond. Timestamp 12:33:41. Physical contact initiated by Deputy Hadley. Your shoulder is pushed. You are seated involuntarily. Your statement at the time, "You're hurting me." Ivory remembered. The hand on her shoulder, the force of the push, the cold metal of the chair against her back. Timestamp 14:33:12. Deputy Hadley states, "I'm placing you under arrest for trespassing under Florida Statute 810.08. You request a statement of probable cause." Deputy Hadley states, "You're getting a lawyer when we get to booking." Timestamp 14:33:47. Handcuffs applied. Your statement, "I am complying peacefully. The time is 2:33 p.m. The handcuffs have been applied at a tightness that will likely cause bruising." Okonkwo looked up from the transcript. Justice Stratton, in 23 years of investigating complaints against court personnel, I have seen a great many questionable detentions. I have seen gray areas, ambiguous evidence, competing interpretations of facts. He closed the folder. This is not one of those cases. This is textbook. Clear, unambiguous, unjustifiable. Deputy Hadley detained you without reasonable suspicion. He used physical force against a compliant citizen. He claimed no record of your entry existed when the visitor log proves otherwise. He attempted to arrest you for a crime you demonstrably did not commit. What happens now? I'm recommending a full disciplinary hearing before the commission for Hadley, Langford, Westbrook, and Mercer. He paused. My preliminary findings will carry significant weight. And Justice Whitmore? Something flickered across Okonkwo's face. That's more complicated. Explain. He wasn't involved in the initial detention. He didn't touch you. He didn't threaten you. His interaction with you in the holding room was brief and, while dismissive, did not rise to the level of actionable misconduct under our guidelines. He told me to be more careful. He said I had a lot of nerve. He walked away without asking a single question about why I was being held. All of which is unprofessional, insensitive, arguably biased. Okonkwo met her eyes. But not sanctionable, not under current rules. The familiar frustration rose in her chest. The knowledge that some people would face consequences while others, those with power, those with position, those with the right credentials, would walk away untouched. What about recusal? That's a separate matter. If you're asking whether Justice Whitmore should recuse himself from any case where you're personally involved, absolutely, without question. I'll be recommending that formally. Failure to recuse would constitute a violation of 28 U.S.C. Section 455 and Florida Code of Judicial Conduct, Canon 3E. And if he refuses? Then it becomes a matter for the full commission, or the legislature. Okonkwo stood. Justice Stratton, I want you to understand something. This investigation is going to be thorough, it's going to be fair, but it's also going to take time, months. There will be hearings, motions, appeals, procedural battles. The system moves slowly. I know. And when it's over, some people will face real consequences. Others won't. That's how systems work. They protect themselves. They sacrifice the weakest members to preserve the structure. I know that too. He studied her for a moment. You're going to be disappointed by some of what happens. The outcomes won't match the offenses. They rarely do. He picked up his folder. But the truth will come out. All of it. That much I can promise you. She stood, extended her hand. That's all I'm asking, investigator. The truth. He shook her hand. Firm. Steady. You'll have it, Justice Stratton, whatever it costs. He left. She sat back down at her desk, and she thought about truth, about what it meant to pursue it, about what it cost to find it, about whether the price was ever worth paying. She didn't know the answer, but she knew she was going to find out. This is where the real battle begins. If you think what happened so far was intense, you haven't seen anything yet. Stay subscribed. The investigation is about to expose everything. 3 weeks later, January 15th. The Judicial Qualifications Commission convened a preliminary hearing. The hearing room was small, windowless, aggressively institutional. Beige walls, gray carpet, fluorescent lights that buzzed at a frequency designed to slowly erode sanity. A long conference table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by chairs filled with lawyers, investigators, and the accused. Commission Chair Margaret Hollister, a white woman in her 60s, former appellate judge, reputation for fairness tempered by rigid adherence to procedure, presided from the head of the table. Her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, she shuffled papers with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. This hearing will come to order. The murmuring ceased. The court reporter, not Shiloh Westbrook, who was among the accused, positioned her fingers over her stenotype. We are convened to review preliminary findings in case JQC 2024-0119 regarding the detention of Justice Ivory Stratton at the Florida Supreme Court building on January 10th of this year. Present are investigator Silas Okonkwo, representatives from the Florida Courts Marshal Service, Union Counsel for Deputy Marshal Hadley, and Justice Stratton as complainant witness. She looked up from her papers. Also present, pursuant to notice, Deputy Marshal Brick Hadley, Administrative Clerk Heather Langford, Court Reporter Shiloh Westbrook, and Appellate Counsel Cassian Mercer. Ivory looked at them. Seated at the far end of the table, flanked by lawyers, they looked diminished somehow, smaller than she remembered. Brick's jaw was set, defiant, but his eyes kept darting to the exits. Heather sat rigidly upright, pearl earrings catching the light, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Shiloh was visibly trembling, clutching a tissue. Cassian alone maintained his composure, though the circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept in weeks. Investigator Okonkwo, please summarize your findings. Okonkwo rose, opened his folder. Madam Chair, members of the Commission, the evidence in this case is extensive and, in my professional opinion, conclusive. He began with the visitor log. This document, obtained from Florida Supreme Court security records, shows that Justice Stratton entered the courthouse at 9:17 a.m. on January 10th through the main public entrance. She presented valid identification, stated her purpose as building tour, and was processed by Officer T. Nguyen. Her entry was logged, recorded, and verified. He slid a copy of the log across the table. Deputy Hadley's incident report, filed at 5:47 p.m. the same day, states that, and I quote, "There was no record of the subject's entry in courthouse systems." This statement is demonstrably false. The record exists. It existed at the time Deputy Hadley made his claim. It was available for verification at any security terminal in the building. He turned to face Brick directly. Deputy Hadley, did you verify the visitor log before claiming no record of Justice Stratton's entry existed? Brick's counsel, a heavy-set man in a rumpled suit who had been objecting since the proceedings began, leaned over to whisper something. Brick shook his head slightly. I relied on the front desk verification. Which front desk verification specifically? I radioed the front desk. They said they had no record. And you didn't independently verify? Didn't check the log yourself? Didn't ask to see the physical sign-in sheet? I trusted my team. Your team told you something that wasn't true, and based on that untrue information, you detained a citizen for over 5 hours. Okonkwo's voice remained level, but something cold had entered it. Is that your testimony? Brick's jaw tightened. I made a determination based on available information. The information that was available, the visitor log, showed Justice Stratton entered legally. You chose not to access that information. You chose to detain her anyway. Objection. Brick's counsel finally spoke. The investigator is characterizing. Overruled. Chair Hollister's voice was sharp. Investigator Okonkwo is summarizing evidence. Continue. Okonkwo moved to the body cam footage. I would now like to address the physical interactions documented on Deputy Hadley's body camera. This footage was downloaded from the Florida Court's security server on January 16th, authenticated by IT specialist Dana Marsh, with chain of custody documented on Form FLSC COC 2024-0891. He began to read from the transcript. Timestamp 12:33:41. Deputy Hadley initiates physical contact with Justice Stratton's right shoulder. The contact is forceful enough to cause Justice Stratton to state, "You're hurting me." The contact continues for approximately 3 seconds before Justice Stratton is pushed into a seated position involuntarily. He looked up. Under Florida Statute Section 784.03, any intentional unwanted touching constitutes simple battery. When committed by a law enforcement officer acting under color of law, this potentially rises to violation of 18 U.S.C. Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. Brick's face had gone pale. His counsel was scribbling notes furiously. Timestamp 14:33:12. Deputy Hadley states he is placing Justice Stratton under arrest for trespassing. Justice Stratton requests a statement of probable cause. Deputy Hadley responds, and I quote, "You're getting a lawyer when we get to booking." At no point in this footage does Deputy Hadley articulate reasonable suspicion for detention. At no point does he inform Justice Stratton of her rights. At no point does he provide a legally adequate basis for the arrest he announced. Okonkwo turned to face the full commission. Deputy Hadley detained a citizen without reasonable suspicion, used physical force against a compliant individual, and attempted to make an arrest without probable cause. Each of these actions constitutes a separate violation of departmental policy and potentially of state and federal law. He sat down. The room was silent. Chair Hollister removed her glasses, polished them slowly, put them back on. Deputy Hadley, do you wish to respond? Brick's counsel started to speak. Brick cut him off. I did my job. His voice was tight, controlled. I saw a suspicious individual in an area where she didn't belong. I investigated. That's what I'm paid to do. And what made Justice Stratton suspicious? Chair Hollister asked. What specifically triggered your concern? She was near a restricted area. She had no visible credentials. She didn't look like... He stopped. Didn't look like what, Deputy Hadley? Silence. Didn't look like what? Brick's jaw worked. His counsel put a hand on his arm, warning. Didn't look like a lawyer, he said finally, or a judge, or anyone who would have legitimate business near the archives. And how should a lawyer look, Deputy Hadley? How should a judge look? Silence. Is there a dress code for legitimacy? A skin color for belonging? Brick said nothing. Chair Hollister turned to the full table. I think we've heard enough on this point. Let's move to the supplemental report filed by court reporter Westbrook. Shiloh Westbrook took the stand, metaphorically speaking, since this was a hearing room, not a courtroom, with the demeanor of a woman walking to her own execution. Her attorney had prepared a statement. She read it from a printed page, her voice quavering so badly that the court reporter asked her to repeat several sentences. At the time of my observation, I believed in good faith that the subject was attempting to access a restricted area. My description of her handling the door mechanism was based on my subjective perception of her body positioning and was not intended to be misleading or false. Okonkwo didn't bother with pleasantries. Ms. Westbrook, I'm going to show you a still image from Archive Corridor Camera 7. He slid the printout across the table. The image was grainy but clear. A woman in a cardigan, standing at a glass door, hands at her sides. This image was captured at timestamp 11:42:31, the midpoint of Justice Stratton's 43 seconds at the archive entrance. Can you see her hands? Shiloh looked at the image. Her lip trembled. Yes. Where are her hands? At her sides. Are they touching anything? No. Are they moving? No. I have reviewed footage from the entire 43-second period, Ms. Westbrook. At no point do Justice Stratton's hands move toward the door. At no point do they touch the glass. At no point do they make any contact with any part of the door mechanism. He leaned forward. Vamos. Can you explain how you observed her handling the door mechanism when the video evidence shows her hands never moved? Shiloh's face crumpled like paper in rain. I thought I saw... I believed. You believed what you wanted to believe, what Deputy Hadley wanted you to believe. Objection. Shiloh's attorney, the young man from the mid-tier firm, finally spoke. The investigator is... I'll rephrase. Okonkwo's voice remained cold. Ms. Westbrook, did Deputy Hadley ask you to file a supplemental report supporting his version of events? The question hung in the air. Shiloh looked at her attorney. He shook his head slightly. She looked at Brick, across the table. He stared straight ahead, refusing to meet her eyes. She looked at Ivory, and something broke. Yes. The word fell like a stone into still water. Yes, he asked me. He said the footage was ambiguous. He said my statement would clarify things. He said it was just procedure, that everyone would understand. And you agreed to file a statement you knew was false? I didn't know it was false. I convinced myself. I told myself maybe I had seen something. Maybe my memory was right and the camera was wrong. He was so sure, he was so confident. And she didn't look like... She stopped. Didn't look like what, Miss Westbrook? Tears streaming now. Tissue clutched in shaking hands. Didn't look like she belonged. The hearing recessed at 4 p.m. Ivory sat in an empty conference room down the hall, waiting for the commission to deliberate. Her phone buzzed continuously. Messages from her clerk, from journalists, from attorneys seeking comment, from old colleagues offering support. She ignored them all. She thought about Shiloh Westbrook, about the tears, about the confession. Didn't look like she belonged. There it was, the whole thing, distilled to its essence. 4 words that explained everything and excused nothing. She didn't look like she belonged. Not because of anything she had done, not because of any crime committed or protocol violated, but because of who she was, what she looked like, the space she occupied in other people's imaginations. A black woman in a cardigan, a threat, a problem to be processed, something to be removed. She thought about her grandmother, about the stories of Jim Crow, of segregated water fountains, of seats at the back of the bus, about the progress that had been made, the doors that had opened, the possibilities that had seemed impossible in her youth, but also about the truth her grandmother had known even then. They'll let you in the door, baby, but they'll never stop wondering if you belong inside. 52 years old, 30 years practicing law, 11 years on the federal bench, confirmed by the Florida Senate to the highest court in the state. And still, they wondered. The door opened. Dana Prescott. Justice Stratton, the commission is ready to announce their preliminary findings. Ivory stood, straightened her jacket, and walked back into the hearing room to learn what justice, such as it was, would look like. So, the findings took 45 minutes to read. Commission Chair Hollister delivered them in the flat, measured cadence of someone reading a legal document, her voice betraying no emotion, no judgment, no hint of personal opinion. In the matter of complaint JQC 2024-0119, the Florida Judicial Qualifications Commission finds as follows. She turned to the first page. Deputy Marshal Brick Hadley. Brick sat rigid, staring straight ahead, not blinking. Sustained, violation of Florida courts, Marshal Policy Section 4.7, use of force. The physical contact at timestamp 12:33:41 constituted unnecessary force against a compliant citizen. Sustained, violation of Florida courts, Marshal Policy Section 6.2, detention procedures. The detention was initiated without articulable reasonable suspicion and continued without verification of entry records. Sustained, violation of Florida Statute Section 784.03, simple battery. The intentional unwanted touching of Justice Stratton constituted battery under Florida law. Ivory felt something unclench in her chest. Recommendation: suspension without pay for 30 days. Mandatory completion of civil rights compliance training, de-escalation training, and implicit bias training. Reassignment from Supreme Court security detail upon return to duty. Criminal referral to State Attorney's Office for consideration of battery charges. Criminal referral. More than she had dared to expect. Note: the Commission acknowledges that criminal prosecution is at the discretion of the state attorney and may be declined. However, the evidence supports referral for independent review. May be declined. There it was. The hedge, the escape hatch. But still, a referral, a record, a formal finding that what had happened to her was not just wrong, but criminal. That was something. Administrative Clerk Heather Langford. Heather's hands tightened on the table edge. Sustained. Violation of Florida Courts Code of Conduct, Section 2.1, professional demeanor. Her statements in the atrium, specifically the phrases, "these people just walk in like they own the place," and the summons for janitorial services, constitute unprofessional conduct with clear racial undertones. Recommendation: written reprimand placed in permanent personnel file. Mandatory completion of diversity, equity, and inclusion training. No suspension. No suspension. For calling the cleaning staff to collect a Supreme Court justice. Written reprimand. Ivory kept her face neutral. She had expected this. Had known, going in, that the system would protect its own. Some consequences. Not all. Some justice. Not enough. But something. Court reporter Shiloh Westbrook. Shiloh was crying again. Quietly now, tears sliding down her cheeks without sound. Sustained. Violation of Florida Statute Section 837.05. False reports to law enforcement. Her supplemental statement describing Justice Stratton as handling the door mechanism is directly contradicted by security footage and constitutes a materially false statement made to support a wrongful detention. Recommendation: referral to State Attorney's Office for consideration of criminal charges. Immediate suspension from court reporting duties pending outcome of criminal review. If charges are declined, reinstatement subject to mandatory training and probationary period of 1 year. Shiloh's sob was audible now. Her attorney put a hand on her shoulder. She shrugged it off. Appellate counsel Cassian Mercer. Cassian's expression didn't change, but Ivory saw his hands, gripping the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Finding: insufficient evidence of professional misconduct. While counsel Mercer's comments regarding Justice Stratton's appearance were inappropriate and demonstrated poor judgment, they do not rise to the level of sanctionable conduct under Florida bar rules. Disposition: matter closed with notation of concern. The Commission encourages counsel Mercer to pursue additional training in cultural competency and professional communication. Notation of concern: encourages, not requires. Encourages. Because questioning a black woman's right to exist in a professional space, as long as you did it politely, as long as you used the right words, wasn't misconduct, it was just concern. Associate Justice Solomon Whitmore. Ivory turned slightly, looking at the empty chair where Whitmore would have sat if he had deigned to appear. He had sent his attorney instead, a thin, nervous man who had said nothing throughout the proceedings. Finding: Justice Whitmore was not involved in the initial detention or the physical contact with Justice Stratton. His interaction in the holding room, while dismissive, did not rise to the level of actionable misconduct under Commission guidelines. Recommendation: the Commission strongly recommends that Justice Whitmore recuse himself from any future case where Justice Stratton is personally involved, per 28 U.S.C. Section 455 and Florida Code of Judicial Conduct, Canon 3E. Failure to recuse may result in automatic reversal of any decision on appeal and potential future misconduct proceedings. Recusal recommendation: not discipline, not acknowledgement, not even an admission that what he had done was wrong, just recusal. Step aside when she's involved. Pretend the conflict doesn't exist the rest of the time. Chair Hollister set down the document. These findings are preliminary and subject to appeal. All parties have 30 days to file objections. Final determinations will be issued following the appeal review period. This hearing is adjourned. She struck the gavel, and it was over. The aftermath was quiet. No dramatic confrontations, no raised voices, just people gathering their papers, speaking in low murmurs to their attorneys, filing out of the room to face whatever consequences awaited them. Brick Hadley left first, flanked by his union counsel, not looking at anyone. His face was set, hard, the face of a man who felt wronged rather than wrong. Shiloh Westbrook remained seated, crying softly, while her attorney made phone calls and murmured reassurances she clearly didn't believe. Heather Langford slipped out a side door without speaking to anyone, her heels clicking against the floor in a rhythm that sounded almost like flight. Cassian Mercer lingered. He approached Ivory near the exit, his expression impossible to read. Justice Stratton. She stopped. Waited. I know the Commission didn't find sufficient evidence against me. His voice was quiet, private. And I know that probably feels like the system protecting its own. It probably is the system protecting its own. She said nothing. But I want you to understand. I've been thinking about what you said at the reception, about systemic change, about how this wasn't really about you. He paused, ran a hand through his hair. I've been practicing law for 22 years, and I never once thought about what it must be like to walk into a courthouse and have people assume you don't belong. That's a failure. My failure. And I don't know how to fix it. Do you want to fix it? The question hung between them. I think so. He met her eyes. I hope so. I guess I won't know until I try. She considered him, the uncertainty in his face, the question in his voice. Actions, Mr. Mercer, not intentions. Show me what you do, not what you mean to do. She walked away. Behind her, she heard him exhale. Not relief exactly. Something more complicated. The sound of a man realizing that redemption, if it came at all, would have to be earned. February. The outcomes filtered in slowly, the way justice always does. Brick Hadley completed his 30-day suspension. During that time, his union filed a grievance contesting the findings. The grievance was denied. An appeal was filed. The appeal was denied. When he returned to duty, it was not to the Supreme Court building. He was reassigned to the 2nd District Court of Appeal in Lakeland, 90 minutes south. A lateral transfer. Same rank, same pay, same pension. Just elsewhere. The state attorney's office reviewed the criminal referral for battery. Ivory followed the process closely, speaking with the prosecutor assigned to the case, providing additional documentation when requested. After 8 weeks of deliberation, they declined to prosecute. The official statement read, "While the evidence supports Deputy Hadley's violation of departmental policy, we do not believe the conduct rises to the level of criminal battery warranting prosecution. The force used, while inappropriate, was brief in duration and did not result in physical injury requiring medical treatment. Prosecution would not serve the interests of justice." Not serve the interests of justice. Ivory read that sentence 3 times. Then she filed the letter in her growing folder of documentation, added a note to her personal record of the case, and returned to her work. She had expected this, had known, realistically, that criminal charges were unlikely to survive the political calculations involved. A deputy marshal charged with battery for pushing a Supreme Court justice? The optics were terrible for everyone, the court system, the marshal service, the state itself. Better to sweep it under the rug. Better to move on. But the finding remained. The documentation remained. The official determination that Brick Hadley had battered a citizen while acting under color of law, that remained in his personnel file forever. And the next time he did it, if there was a next time, there would be a record. That was something. Heather Langford completed her mandatory training. Ivory saw the certificate once, walking past the administrative clerk's window. It hung on the wall behind Heather's desk, framed in cheap black plastic. Certificate of Completion, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the Workplace. Heather M. Langford. Heather was still there, still processing paperwork, still running the office with the same territorial precision she had demonstrated for 22 years. Some things changed. Most things didn't. But Ivory noticed that Heather no longer looked at her directly. When they passed in hallways, Heather's eyes would slide away, finding sudden interest in papers or phones or the middle distance. When official documents required the administrative clerk's signature, they appeared on Ivory's desk via Dana, never delivered in person. Fear? Shame? Resentment? Ivory didn't know. Didn't particularly care. The woman who had called for housekeeping to collect her now flinched when they shared an elevator. That was its own kind of justice. Shiloh Westbrook's case took longer. The criminal referral for filing a false report wound through the system. Grand jury consideration, prosecutorial review, back-and-forth negotiations between her defense attorney and the state attorney's office about potential plea arrangements. 6 months after the incident, the charges were quietly declined. Insufficient evidence of intent to deceive, the state attorney's office announced. Ms. Westbrook's statement, while factually inaccurate, appears to have been based on genuine misperception rather than deliberate falsification. Prosecution would require proof beyond reasonable doubt that she knowingly made a false statement with intent to mislead, and the available evidence does not support that burden. Genuine misperception. She genuinely perceived a black woman standing still as a threat. She genuinely perceived hands at sides as hands on a door. She genuinely perceived someone who didn't look like she belonged as someone who was doing something wrong. And that, the unconscious bias, the reflexive suspicion, the casual assumption of guilt, wasn't criminal. It was just how things were. Shiloh was reinstated to court reporting duties after completing mandatory training. Ivory never saw her in the Supreme Court building again. She had requested a transfer to a different district and received it, running away, or starting over. Ivory didn't know which, didn't much care. But some things did change. In March, the Florida court's administrator announced new visitor protocols. The press release was issued on a Friday afternoon, the traditional burial ground for announcements that officials hoped would escape notice. 3 paragraphs, clinical language, no mention of Justice Stratton or the incident that had prompted the changes. Effective immediately, all Florida Supreme Court visitors will receive printed confirmation of entry upon security screening. This confirmation shall serve as documented proof of legal access to the building and shall be presented upon request to any court security personnel. Body cameras worn by Florida courts marshals shall be subject to automatic upload to a secure central server within 24 hours of shift completion. Footage shall be retained for 90 days minimum, with retention extended indefinitely for any footage relating to detentions, complaints, or use of force incidents. Detention of visitors shall require documented reasonable suspicion verified by a supervisor within 15 minutes of initial contact. Failure to document adequate legal basis shall result in immediate release and automatic review by the Judicial Qualifications Commission. 3 paragraphs, no acknowledgement, no apology, no admission that anything had been wrong. But the policies were there, in writing, enforceable. Every visitor would receive a receipt. Every detention would require documentation. Every piece of body cam footage would be preserved. 1 black woman detained, 1 public outcry, 1 investigation. And now, every citizen who walked through the doors of the Florida Supreme Court would have more protection than they'd had before. Small changes, incremental changes, the kind of changes that wouldn't have happened if she had walked away, if she had accepted the warning and gone home, if she had decided it wasn't worth the fight. She had fought, and something, not everything, but something, had changed. One evening in late March, a knock came at her chamber door. "Come in." The door opened. Caleb Toomey stood there, still in his custodian uniform, mop and bucket beside him, 23 years of this building written in every line of his weathered face. "Evening, Justice?" "Caleb." She smiled, the first genuine smile she had felt in days. "Please, come in." He stepped inside, leaving his cleaning supplies in the hallway. His eyes moved across the bookshelves, the massive desk, the windows overlooking the courtyard, the trappings of power that he had spent 2 decades cleaning around, never sitting among. "I won't take but a minute." His voice was quiet, respectful, but not deferential. The voice of a man who had earned his own kind of dignity. Just wanted to say something. "Please. I've worked here 23 years, watched a lot of justices come through, good ones, bad ones, and plenty in between. Some of them looked right through me like I was part of the furniture. Some nodded like they were doing me a favor. Few actually saw me at all." He met her eyes. "You're the first one who ever counted the portraits." She remembered, standing in the atrium that first Friday morning, looking at the faces on the wall. Counting. "You noticed that." "I notice everything, Justice Stratton. Only power I've got." A ghost of a smile. "And I noticed you standing there, looking up at those faces, counting them off one by one. Noticed how long you stood there. Noticed the look on your face when you finished counting." "What look was that?" "Like you'd been counting your whole life, and you were tired of the number." She felt something tighten in her throat, unexpected, unwelcome. "My grandmother used to tell me. She said they'd let us in eventually, through the front door and everything. but they'd never stop wondering if we belonged inside. Caleb nodded slowly. Wise woman. She was. Raised me, taught me everything worth knowing. Ivory paused. Including how to count. How to count? How to count the costs. How to count the victories. How to count the portraits on the wall and know that each one represented someone's grandmother who had hoped and prayed and sacrificed so that face could hang there. She stood, walked around her desk to face him directly. You saw me, Caleb. When everyone else in this building was looking through me or past me or at some version of me that existed only in their assumptions, you saw me. You spoke to me in that holding cell when everyone else was pretending I didn't exist. Just did what was right. Do you know how rare that is? Doing what's right when there's no audience? When there's no reward? When the only thing you get from it is the knowledge that you did the right thing? He was quiet for a moment. My mama used to say, you don't do right for the reward. You do right because right is right. The reward is you get to look at yourself in the mirror without flinching. Your mama was a wise woman too. She was. His eyes softened. She would have liked you, Justice Stratton. Would have said you had steel in your spine and fire in your heart. Ivory felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back. Thank you, Caleb. That means more than you could possibly know. He nodded, turned toward the door, stopped. One more thing. Yes? That DOJ assessment they announced last week, the one about court security practices. She had seen the news alert, had wondered, quietly, who had filed the complaint that had triggered the federal review. What about it? Caleb smiled, wide and warm and full of something that looked very much like satisfaction. Anonymous complaint, they said. Someone with detailed knowledge of courthouse security operations. 23 years of detailed knowledge, you might say. She stared at him. Caleb. Good night, Justice Stratton. He walked out, collected his mop and bucket, headed down the hallway, whistling softly. And Ivory Stratton, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of Florida, confirmed by the Senate, invested with full ceremony, entitled to all the dignities and privileges of her office, sat down at her desk and laughed. She laughed until tears came, because sometimes justice came from the places you least expected, and sometimes the most powerful weapon against a corrupt system was a custodian with 23 years of watching, 23 years of remembering, and 23 years of waiting for the right moment to act. April. Oral arguments. Ivory sat on the bench for a civil rights case that felt, in many ways, like a mirror of her own experience. Marcus Williams, black man, Jacksonville. Stopped by police for matching a description. The description: black male, medium build, dark clothing. The location: a public sidewalk, 3 blocks from a reported burglary. He had been detained for 45 minutes, handcuffed, questioned, searched, then released without charges when the actual suspect was apprehended 6 blocks away. The lower court had ruled for the police. His attorneys had appealed, citing 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, the same federal statute that governed civil rights violations by government actors. Ivory listened to the arguments, took careful notes, asked questions that probed the boundaries of reasonable suspicion, the limits of police discretion, the constitutional protections that were supposed to shield citizens from exactly this kind of arbitrary treatment. When the case was decided, she wrote the majority opinion. It took her 3 weeks, 3 weeks of drafting and revising, of researching precedent and weighing principles, of finding the exact words to express what she believed and why she believed it. The Fourth Amendment requires more than demographic coincidence to justify detention. A description of black male, medium build, dark clothing could describe thousands of citizens in any Florida city on any given day. Without particularized, articulable facts, specific behaviors, specific locations, specific timing that distinguish the individual from the general population, such a description provides no constitutionally adequate basis for seizure. We hold that the detention of Mr. Williams was not supported by reasonable suspicion as required by Terry v. Ohio and its progeny. The officers possessed nothing more than a vague racial description and geographic proximity. This is insufficient. The Constitution requires more. The lower court's ruling is reversed. The decision was 5-2. Justice Solomon Whitmore dissented. His opinion, brief, technical, meticulously bloodless, argued that the officers had acted within the bounds of established precedent and reasonable professional judgment. He did not speak to her in chambers afterward. He did not speak to her at all. The letter he had sent her, still unopened, still sitting in her desk drawer where she had placed it the day it arrived, remained a mystery. She hadn't decided yet whether she would ever open it. Some truths, she had learned, were better left unknown. Some doors were better left closed. May. The DOJ investigation expanded. What had begun as an assessment of Florida court security practices, prompted by an anonymous complaint from a source with detailed knowledge of courthouse operations, had grown into a full civil rights review. Federal investigators spent 3 weeks in Tallahassee. They interviewed current and former employees. They reviewed years of incident reports, detention records, complaints. They compared treatment of black visitors against treatment of white visitors, quantifying what everyone already knew. The disparities were real, they were significant, and they were systemic. The preliminary findings, when they leaked to the press, were damning. Black visitors to the Florida Supreme Court were 6 times more likely to be stopped for secondary screening than white visitors. They were 4 times more likely to be detained pending verification of credentials. They were 8 times more likely to receive warnings for behavior that resulted in no consequences for white visitors. The courthouse wasn't just biased, it was systematically, measurably, demonstrably biased. And now everyone knew. June. A summer evening. The sun was setting over Tallahassee, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Ivory left the courthouse through the front entrance, the same entrance she had used that Friday morning 6 months ago. Her choice. Always her choice now. At the security desk, a new officer, young, professional, carefully trained under the new protocols, nodded as she passed. "Good evening, Justice Stratton." "Good evening." She walked down the marble steps, the same steps she had climbed that January morning when she was a tourist, a visitor, a problem to be processed. The same entrance where she had waited in the public line, presented her ID, been waved through like any other citizen. So much had changed since then, and so little. Brick Hadley was still employed by the Florida court system, in Lakeland now, 90 minutes south, but still working security, still making decisions about who belonged and who didn't. Heather Langford still ran the administrative clerk's office, her diversity training certificate gathering dust on the wall behind her desk. Solomon Whitmore still sat 2 chairs away from Ivory on the bench, maintaining his silence, his distance, his studied pretense that nothing had happened between them. The system had cracked, but it hadn't broken. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Her phone buzzed. A news alert. She looked at the screen. DOJ Civil Rights Division opens formal investigation of Florida courts' security practices following pattern of discrimination findings. Federal monitors may be appointed. Formal investigation. Federal monitors. Not just an assessment anymore, not just recommendations, but oversight, accountability. The full weight of the federal government examining every policy, every practice, every decision made by the people who had detained her. She thought about Caleb, about 23 years of watching, about the anonymous complaint that had started all of this. She thought about her grandmother, about doors that opened and doors that didn't, about the difference between being allowed inside and being made to feel like you belonged. She put the phone in her pocket, looked up at the courthouse behind her, the marble columns, the state seal above the entrance, the building that had been here for generations and would be here for generations more. Inside, somewhere, Solomon Whitmore's letter waited. Inside, somewhere, new policies were being implemented or ignored. Inside, somewhere, The next Brick Hadley was deciding whether a visitor looked like they belonged. The system continued. But it was being watched now, documented, held accountable. And that was something. She walked toward her car, robes folded carefully in the garment bag over her arm, the same bag she had brought to the Hampton Inn 6 months ago, the same woman who had worn a cardigan and reading glasses, the same woman who had been pushed into a chair, handcuffed, accused, dismissed, the same woman who had counted the portraits. There were 7 now, 7 faces on the wall of the Florida Supreme Court rotunda. 6 men, 1 woman, her. She thought about her grandmother again, about doors that had opened, about possibilities that had seemed impossible, about the truth she had learned the hard way. That Friday afternoon, they let you in, but they never stop wondering if you belong. She unlocked her car, set the garment bag in the back seat, paused with her hand on the door. The phone rang. She checked the caller ID. Unknown number. She answered anyway. Justice Stratton. A pause. Static. Then a voice. Young, female, uncertain. Justice Stratton? My name is Keisha Washington. I'm a second-year law student at Florida A&M. I read about what happened to you at the courthouse. Ivory leaned against her car, let the evening air wash over her. Yes? I wanted to ask you something, if that's okay, if you have time. I have time. Another pause, the sound of someone gathering courage. How did you do it? How did you stand there and take all of that, the accusations, the detention, the way they treated you, and not break? How did you not just walk away and never come back? Ivory was quiet for a long moment. She thought about the holding cell, the fluorescent lights, the cold metal bench, the camera in the corner that had recorded everything. She thought about Brick Hadley's hand on her shoulder, about Heather Langford's sneer, about Solomon Whitmore's dismissal, about the 5 hours that had felt like 5 years. I broke, she said finally. I broke 100 times. Every time someone looked at me and saw suspicious. Every time someone assumed I didn't belong. Every time I had to prove my right to exist in a space I had earned. I broke. She paused. But breaking isn't the same as stopping, Keisha. You can break and keep moving. You can crack and still hold together. That's what they don't understand. The people who think they can destroy you by treating you like you're less than human. They think if they push hard enough, you'll go away. They think if they humiliate you enough, you'll give up. Did you want to give up? Every single day. For the first week, I woke up every morning wondering if it was worth it. If any of it was worth it. If I should just resign and walk away and let them win. What made you stay? Ivory thought about the question, really thought about it. My grandmother. Women like her who came before me. The ones who sat at lunch counters and got coffee poured on their heads. The ones who tried to vote and got beaten for it. The ones who walked into courtrooms and schools and workplaces where everyone wanted them to fail and succeeded anyway. She paused. They didn't do all of that so I could quit. They did it so I could have the chance to fight. And as long as I have that chance, as long as I'm still breathing and still able to show up, I owe it to them to keep going. Even when it hurts? Especially when it hurts, because that's when it matters most. Anyone can fight when it's easy. The ones who change things are the ones who fight when it's hard. Silence on the other end. Then, softly, "Thank you, Justice Stratton." "You're welcome, Keisha. And one more thing." "Yes?" "Keep going. Even when you break. Even when you're tired. Even when everyone around you is telling you that you don't belong. Keep going. Count the portraits on the wall, and know that every one of them was put there by someone who refused to quit. How do you know it'll be worth it?" Ivory smiled, a tired smile, a real one. "Because I'm still here, because every black woman who came before me is still here, in the precedents we set, the doors we opened, the paths we carved. They tried to stop us for 400 years, and we're still here. Thank you. Good night, Keisha." She hung up. Sat in her car for a moment, keys in hand, looking at the courthouse in her rearview mirror. The lights were coming on now, windows glowing against the darkening sky. Inside, janitors were mopping floors, and lawyers were finishing briefs, and security guards were making rounds. Inside, Caleb Toomey was probably pushing his cart down some hallway, noticing everything, remembering everything, waiting for the next time he would be needed. Inside, Solomon Whitmore's letter still sat in her desk drawer, unopened, its secrets preserved. And somewhere in Lakeland, 90 minutes south, Brick Hadley was working security at the 2nd District Court of Appeal, watching visitors walk through the metal detectors, deciding, one face at a time, who looked like they belonged. Some things change, some things don't. And the only way to know which is to keep watching, keep documenting, keep showing up, keep counting. 18 months after Justice Ivory Stratton took her seat on the Florida Supreme Court, the DOJ completed its formal investigation. The final report cited systemic failures in training, documentation, accountability, and civil rights compliance throughout the Florida court's security apparatus. 23 recommendations were issued. 19 were implemented within the first year. 4 remained under review. Federal monitors were appointed for an initial term of 3 years, with extension possible based on compliance assessments. Deputy Marshal Brick Hadley retired with full pension in 2027, citing personal health concerns. His personnel file, now permanently flagged with the JQC findings, followed him into retirement. Administrative Clerk Heather Langford remained in her position until 2028, when she was quietly transferred to a regional office following a second complaint, this one from a Hispanic attorney who was asked to prove his bar membership before being allowed to use the attorney entrance. She is currently on administrative leave pending investigation. Court reporter Shiloh Westbrook left court reporting entirely. She works as a paralegal at a small firm in Tampa and has declined all requests for interviews about the incident. Her personnel file notes that she resigned in good standing. Cassian Mercer became an unexpected advocate for implicit bias training in the Florida Bar Association. In 2027, he sponsored a resolution requiring all member attorneys to complete annual diversity education. It passed by a margin of 7 votes. In 2028, he donated $50,000 to establish a scholarship fund for first-generation law students at Florida A&M. Justice Solomon Whitmore served 3 more years on the Florida Supreme Court before announcing his retirement in 2028. He was honored at a ceremony attended by 200 guests. Justice Stratton did not attend. His letter to her was found, still sealed, in her desk drawer. She never opened it. Caleb Toomey retired in 2029 after 28 years of service. At his retirement party, Justice Stratton gave a speech in which she called him the most observant person I have ever met and one of the bravest. He received a standing ovation. He currently volunteers at a community center in Tallahassee, teaching young people about civic engagement and the importance of paying attention. Justice Ivory Stratton served on the Florida Supreme Court for 11 years. She wrote 847 opinions, including landmark decisions on civil rights, criminal procedure, police accountability, and judicial ethics. In 2032, she was named Chief Justice, the first black woman to hold the position in Florida history. At her investiture, she stood before the portrait wall, now 13 faces long, and said, "When I first walked into this building, I counted the portraits. It's what my grandmother taught me to do, count the ones who came before, the ones who made a way. I counted 6 men and 1 woman. I looked at those faces, and I thought about all the people they represented, and all the people they didn't." She paused. "Today, I want to speak to everyone who has ever been told they don't belong. Everyone who has ever been stopped, questioned, detained, dismissed because someone looked at them and decided they were suspicious. Everyone who has ever had to prove their right to exist in a space they had earned. You belong. You have always belonged. The question was never whether you had the right to be here. The question was whether the people already inside would recognize that right, and if they don't, If they refuse to see you, refuse to acknowledge you, refuse to treat you with dignity, that is their failure, not yours. She looked out at the gallery, at the dignitaries and journalists and law students, at the security guards standing at attention, at the custodian in the back row who had been watching and waiting for 33 years. Keep counting the portraits, she said. Keep adding to the wall. Keep showing up, even when they push you down. Because every face up there represents someone who refused to quit, someone who insisted on being seen, someone who understood that the only way to change a system is to be in it, changing it, every single day. That's what I learned in this building. That's what this building taught me. The hard way, in a holding cell, in handcuffs, counting the hours until someone finally admitted I belonged. And now I'm Chief Justice, and I'm still counting. She smiled. But there are more of us to count now, and there will be more tomorrow, and more the day after that. They let us in the door, and we're not leaving. Oh, but she would not be the last.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you found the content helpful, please remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming episodes. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment below. We are always here to listen.